Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street partners with businesses, organisations and unions and social democratic parties across Australia and the globe to train leaders, develop engagement strategies and empower people to organise for change. And in 2020, Dunn Street will continue to work with folks that want to make a difference, inspire, give hope and enable leadership to achieve their shared purpose. To find out how you can partner with Dunn Street, hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left political and cultural podcast that dives into the progressive issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. On this week, this episode is our Northern Territory election preview. We're going to be joined by the former party secretary for Territory Labor and a guy that's still working on the campaign, but from a consultancy perspective. So we're getting some insider Labor ball here. Kent Rowe is going to join us on today's podcast to just help us break down all of the issues that are shaping the election in the Northern Territory, which is going to be held not this Saturday, but next Saturday, which off the top of my head, I should have had that written down beforehand, is Saturday, the 22nd of August. So I literally think that this is the only Labor podcast that will be doing a preview of the Northern Territory election. So if you want to get all the inside news, this is the episode to listen to. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Stitcher. And if you're an Apple Podcast user, please leave us a rating and a review. And for all of the updates about the podcast, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn. Let's get to today's episode. Okay, we're taping this one on a Friday afternoon in lockdown Melbourne, and joining us on the line from the Free Territories is the former Labor Party Secretary for Territory Labor and now a fellow campaign consultant who's consulting for Campaign Edge Sprout, which is actually working on a lot of the advertising campaign for Territory Labor in the upcoming territory elections. Kent Rowe, welcome to Socially Democratic.
Hello, Stephen. Good to be with you.
Victorian lockdown is giving me a bit of cabin fever at the moment, and social media is providing me with constant reminders of places that I have been this time of the year in over the past 5 to 10 years. And I was reminded ago that 4 years ago, I probably would have been sitting on the porch in a sort of late afternoon in Coconut Grove, sipping a beer with my laptop while there was a sort of evening phone bank going on, and F-15s and F-18s screaming over my head as they take off from Darwin Airport for that. Was it Operation Pitch Black?
Pitch Black, yeah. It's a regular one that sort of happens every couple of years, it tears up the sky. And
thinking about that and thinking, I remember thinking at the time when I was working on that campaign going, life's pretty good. I'm a pretty lucky bloke. The Labor Party's been good to me over the years, and that was one of the moments that I always treasure.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have to keep an eye on time for this one because I'm due at the Charitable Boat Club for a pint pretty soon after this. So, we'll have to keep an eye.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of the things that you can do, the things that we can't do.
Yeah, then I'll be going out to dinner with the family. It'll be good.
Yeah, anyway. But look, one thing I did think about actually, and look, on today's podcast, we're gonna break down the campaign, get your insights into where Labor has been since the 2016 campaign, taking us all the way up to election day next Saturday. But before we do that, it's worth acknowledging that a lot of my friends from down south who had worked on previous territory campaigns had said to me, Stephen, if there's anything that you do before you die in a campaign space, you need to go campaign on a Northern Territory election campaign. It is a one in a kind experience. And I came up there for 2 months, I think it was. And I wasn't disappointed. I was not disappointed in any way, shape or form. It is one of the most formative campaign experiences in my life. And it was certainly great working with you as the party secretary. And without blowing too much wind up your ass, You were the
No, keep going.
Yeah. I know. You were the Territory Campaign Director that oversaw Labor being returned to office in a landslide election victory in August 2016. And it was correct me if I'm wrong here, but it was the CLP suffered the worst defeat of a sitting government in Territory history in that landslide election that brought Michael Gunner and his team into government.
Yeah, no, it was a very heavy defeat for the Tories across the board. Not many times in your life do you reduce them down to 2. We'd knocked the opposition down from 2001 to 2005. We knocked them down to 4 after that election, and assumed that was probably the best we're ever going to do. But we pulled off a pretty miraculous victory. Not necessarily in terms of there was a lot of things going our way, but we really had sharpened the saw in terms of what we were saying and how we were going to deliver those messages based off the back of the hard work of a lot of people around the place in real investment and not just sort of financially but sort of emotionally into direct voter contact, which meant that, there was probably a handful of seats that if we weren't putting the work in, they probably wouldn't have got over the line, but we pushed a whole range of seats over the line that might have been tough otherwise. So there's people like Tony Stevens is sitting out in Brennan right now that was probably in a seat that we wouldn't have thought we'd picked up in 2016, but Wayne being pre-selected in October 2015 and Christmas 2016, he knocked on 1,500 doors, which is roughly a third of the electorate. So it is a place where DVC matters everywhere, but this is a place where the numbers of people you talk to are significant parts of your electorate. You don't just have to target hard parts; you can go after all of it. So there was a lot of people involved, and a lot of people did some really great work. And it was the real understanding that people vote in elections, and people vote for how they feel and whether they think that they're looking after. You're going to be able to look after them in Parliament, and we put a whole lot of people out there, and that were truly representative of the people they were going to look after, and we allowed them to meet them and develop relationships with them, and that was the basis of where we. But we also picked up our first seat ever in Alice Springs in Braylon with Dale Wakefield, and we won Catherine for the first time. So these are sort of urban areas of the remote territory that we've often lost in really, really heavy circumstances before, and we for the first time showed ourselves and our values and how they align with the people of those places.
The diversity of campaigning in the Northern Territory is remarkable because you have the urban centres in Darwin itself and the sort of satellite city, Palmerston, which kind of has a different feel about it, but is only just down the road. Plus, places like Catherine and Darwin you mentioned, but then also there's these, huge electorates. So some of these electorates are quite small and have 4,000-5,000 electors crammed into 3 or 4 kilometres. And then you have, electorates that my brain can't even consider how big these electorates are. And we'll talk a bit about how do we overcome those challenges later, but just sort of give us a bit of a flavour of what it is like to campaign in the Territory.
Sure. So I think one of the big challenges that's very different to most other places of campaigning in the Territory is the dynamicness of our size. And we're a little bit like the TARDIS in a way. We're a lot bigger on the inside than we are on the outside. So you might look at us and say there's only 100,000 people, but in that 100,000 people, there's probably 20-odd distinct voting universes and, demographics of people when you have to take that into consideration. You've also got to understand the scale of economics in a way of a campaign, whereas in some of those big places you'll have a lot of really heavy resource poured in, and you might be involved in part of the campaign but not part of different parts of it, or there's a lot of other people to pick up the slack. Whereas up here, the meta of politics and the micro of politics really sort of live side by side, and you can be. And it's quite often I'll be sitting in a meeting where we're talking about strategy and what our media messaging is one day, and then an hour and a half later I'm out on the doors and sort of talking to somebody about teacher cuts or public service cuts, and And so there's a real need to be good at every part of your game up here. And if you campaign up here, you need to have the ability to switch up pretty quickly on how you're performing and how you're doing and how you're engaging. The other really good thing about the size of our electorates too is it doesn't really matter whether what part of the party you've come from, and if you do get a chance to come up here and spend a couple of weeks with us during the campaign sometime, you'll notice that there's when the campaign itself is actually on, there's a real melting pot. So it doesn't matter what group you are from or or faction or anything like that. We sort of all end up at the same pubs having a few beers, and it's you really get back to the fact that we all wear red shirts and we all really want to get Labor governments elected. And it's there's a real camaraderie that you get to develop, because you might be in one seat and somebody else in the other seat, and you might meet up at the end of the day or the end of the week, and there's a real sort of lifting of the spirits, which I don't until I've campaigned a few other places, and you sort of get locked in your own little electorate world, and that's where you stay. Whereas here, you get to feel like you're part of the bigger team that's going on all the time, and that's something we really encourage, because at the end of the day, as much as effective as door knocking is, putting in 30-odd hours in 30-degree heat when the humidity's starting to pick up, having some comrades to sort of pump up your energy isn't necessarily a bad thing. So in terms of what does it look like? For the territory election, we've got 25 seats up here. For the people that playing along at home, that means we've got single member-based electorates. So we've got 25 races that are happening, simultaneously. We've got the Darwin urban area, which I think at the moment's got 13 seats in it, or maybe 12 and a bit, which is roughly what we would call Solomon if you think about it in a federal context. And that covers Darwin and Palmerston, and has some little rural Darwin rural elements to it. Outside of that, you've got the Litchfield Shire and the rural area, which is sort of the most northern part, and this would be the Lingiari zone. So you'd have there's 3 seats in the rural area, and then you've got what we call our remote seats. So you've got like Arnhem, Arafura, which is in the northeast corner of the Northern Territory. You've got Catherine, which is sort of our inland stock hub, which is about 3 hours south of Darwin. And then another 8 hours south of Catherine, you've got the centre of the seat of Barclay, which is Tennant Creek. And then another 5 hours south of that, you've got Alice Springs, which has another 3 seats in there. And then basically, if you look at a map of the territory, apart from the sort of the top bit you cut off, if you have a look at the territory and sort of split it down the line of the Stuart Highway, you've got Barclay on one side and the former seat of Stuart, or the seat of Wodger, on the other, and both of those seats basically take up, a couple of halves of Europe. And going a visit. So, a candidate or a member on a service, those things, you're putting in 40, 50,000 kilometres just to go meet all the people we need to go meet.
The distance is incredible, and if you're a field organiser and you're driving to a door knock and you're halfway there and you've realised you left all the walk packs back in the campaign office and you've got to turn around and go back and get them. If you were driving from Tennant Creek to Alice Springs, which is an 8-hour drive or whatever, and you realise that you're halfway there and you've left the door knocking packs back in the office, that's a little bit of a different challenge. Do I go back and get them?
Yeah, no.
Do I just stay out in the desert now until the campaign's over because I don't want to admit that I've done this? These are decisions you need to make when you're out there, I guess.
Well, we've got pretty decent mobile phone coverage nowadays, so we can use the Cantrain Central app online now. So, and we've, so some of these problems are alleviated in a certain sense. There's some really, strange logistical challenges. So, we have a ballot draw is on the Thursday, so that was Thursday last week, and by Monday the remote access polling has started. So, people are driving around the territory, collecting votes. So we've actually been voting up here since Monday, in remote and rural areas. So, if you don't have those, ballot orders finalised and you don't have those cards printed, and if they don't make the right people by a certain time on Sunday afternoon, then they miss the first 3-hour drive south, which is followed by, another 3 days of driving following this remote polling schedule out. It's a difficult thing.
Where did Territory Alliance spring from in terms of this division within the Conservatives? Look,
I got emotionally sidetracked by that whole thing. It took a little bit of energy out of the tanks. Where Territory Alliance sprang from, so Terry Mills, about 4 weeks before the last election, decided he was going to put his hat in and run for Parliament. Terry's been a player for a long time in Parliament. I think I was 15 years old when he was first elected. And if anyone's seen Vision of his podcast, I'm no longer anywhere near 15 years old. Terry had been around for a while, lost his leadership, left the Parliament to take up a really, really highly paid consulting position in Indonesia, and then sent a tweet that was mean to Adil Giles, so lost his position in Indonesia and came back and decided to contest. And when the new Parliament was formed and there was 2 CLP members, there was Robin Lamley, who was a former CLP Treasurer, elected, obviously Terry Mills. There was always some sort of thought that at least Terry and Robin, who were seen as being victims together, would find a way to form together. That has taken lots of evolutions. There was talk that they were going to form the North Australia Conservatives Party. There was talk that they were going to bring the Nationals up to the NT, and for people listening that probably aren't as in tune with Northern Territory political history, is a bit of history repeating itself, where former CLP Chief Minister Ian Tuxworth in the 80s, who had lost his way inside his party, tried to bring up the Nationals. And so the Nationals and the CLP actually had 3-corner races in the 80s and were basically wiped out except for Tuxie holding his own seat. So that was the last time they tried that. So the Nationals, they came out and announced they were going to form the Nationals Northern Territory branch. The Nationals, I think, just from memory, and I might be foggy on this, but the Nationals came out within a couple of days and said, no, you're not. So they went back to the drawing board. Terry decided he was going to do his Terry's Alliance Party, and they have come out and they've got themselves together and they're running as a third force now. They've picked up some former Labor people as well, and they're trying to present themselves as a sort of third way alternative. But the stark reality about Territory Alliance is they're a conservative choice, not necessarily a progressive alternative. Terry Mills and his party, were voters against gay marriage. They voted against RU486. They a lot of really regressive social practices are sort of hidden just under the surface of what they do. So they are. They're definitely new in terms of branding, but they are probably not so new in terms of the policies they've come up with and the ideas they want to take forward.
We'll come back to them later when we have a look at some of the seats and where they may pose a bit of a threat for us. But I want to turn our attention now to Michael Gunner and his leadership over the past 4 years. And I feel like we need to kind of draw a line in the sand and to sort of reflect on his leadership pre-COVID and then since COVID. Going into sort of pre-February, March this year, how would you have described Labor's standing within the electorate heading into an election year?
I think it'd be naive of me to say that we're anything other than a bit of a tough spot. We were. I think we suffered greatly from the fact that there were 18 Labor members of the Parliament, 2 formal opposition members, and a handful of other people sort of scattered around the place, which meant that you didn't really have a concerted opposition force uniting against you. And I sort of equate that to being sort of we were naked on a stage with every floodlight pointed on us and people sort of pointing out every nook and cranny and crevice. So I think there was definitely some issues that were created around that. So and everything was people only looking at one side of politics for 3.5 years. I think too, the other thing that sort of framed up a lot of the negative debate up here is, some people might remember there was an article that came out on Four Corners about 6 weeks before the last territory election that was around youth justice and the treatment of prisoners in correction centres up in the Northern Territory. And that came out with a commission. And the findings of those commissions and the response from the community and people were that the reality of the situation with how to deal with youth crime hadn't actually been addressed, and that the balance had gone too far the other way. And so that's helped frame quite a negative perception around youth crime and the actions towards that. So probably similar to what Dan Andrews faced in the lead up to the last Victorian election with the Axis gangs and things like that. Sort of there's a lot of high feeling incentive towards it. So there was some feeling that there wasn't the right decisions made in that regard. And then the other big one was, how well our financial position has been. So the Northern Territory is a place that relies on federal funding a lot for its existence. There's an old saying that we like to talk about at pubs, which is horizontal fiscal equalisation is the glue that binds the nation together. And we just need a little bit more glue. But when you have a look at the Northern Territory over the last sort of 10 years, there's been something like 20,000 federal public servants that have been moved out. So that's not just them, their wages and the people that moved up, and that includes defence people as well. That also then affects the amount of GST that we get funded that goes along with that. So there's been some really dramatic shifts in the revenue base of the Northern Territory. And when you have significant revenue-based shifting, plus the economy hasn't been quite as strong as it needed to be, it means that we've been really in a spot where we've been vulnerable to the traditional, Labor debt sort of attacks from the Conservatives. So in a way, there was a lot of things that were forming up to be a really conservative dream on what they could attack the government on, but there were still opportunities for the government to talk about what they'd done. So, when they talk about debt, we talked about what they cut. They cut over 600 teachers or support staff out of our schools, and when you're in a small place, 600 teachers is a lot. They promised not to sack public services, and within a month of getting in, they'd done a hiring freeze, and that includes people on temporary contracts that then just weren't getting renewed. So they were effectively being sacked. And there was a whole raft of these sort of deep cuts that they were doing across the board. They promised to recruit 120 teachers in their 4 years. They, I think, only got up to 60 or something. There's all these things where they stopped investing in the community. And one of the big problems that we had when we got in was we had a community that had been cut back to bare, which then stalled our economy, which also meant that people weren't getting the services that they needed to get for the place to function properly. So we had to spend a lot of time, a lot of money and a lot of resource getting things back up to speed and making sure they work. And, there's some really great results that we've seen across the place that have come out. So, for instance, there was some really good NAPLAN results that we'd had for a while where dragged our rates up quite significantly. I don't have the figures in front of me, unfortunately, but because I don't think I'll be talking NAPLAN today. But we've actually seen a lot of fruits of our labour. And one of the other really big things that we're proud of, which is a great story for the bush. So in the bush, over the last term of government, I think there've been 30 houses built in the Giles term. I could be slightly off on that figure. But we have built or seriously renovated over 2,000 homes in the bush in the last 4 years. So really significant, big bits of policy that aren't just pie in the sky stuff. There's people that were living in conditions that you wouldn't expect in Australia, now having extra rooms built on their houses or complete brand new houses. And it's all been done through local decision making. So if you drive through some of these communities, there's not just sort of these block houses that are built, with horrible grey colours, painted bright blue and pink and whatever people want and all that other stuff. So it's one of those things that when you get in politics and you want to move the needle on different things and you want to feel like you've made a difference, when you can say at the end of a term you've built or renovated over 2,000 homes in the bush, that you've actually helped a lot of people out, and we've got another 8 years of the program to go. So,
and then in February, March, we entered into this incredibly unique circumstance upon which a global pandemic has started to spread across the country, and a lot of eyes actually did look to the Territory and what kind of impact it would have, particularly in the rural and regional communities. And Gunner was really, I mean, I just felt from an observer from way down south, Gunner's leadership just came to the fore. I just thought that he became not became incredibly strong, but we saw the strength of his leadership and the clarity that he gave, and also having a good understanding of what Territorians want to hear from their leader. Just give us your thoughts on this change since COVID's come on the scene.
Yeah, so a lot of people talk about, how Michael's leadership has changed, and I kind of agree with you. It's not that his leadership has changed; it's just that it's been viewed, or it's had an opportunity to be viewed in its entirety. Thing that Michael's actually got a really beautiful Territory story. He was, I'm going to get a bit of this wrong somehow, but I think he was born in Alice. He was raised in Tennant Creek, and then spent the rest of his life in Darwin. So he's a truly Territory boy. Came up through housing commission and all that sort of stuff. He wants to be like he's just had his kid here, and he wants to have his kids here, and it's one of the problems with the Territories. You get a lot of people that come up for a little while. They sort of take as much as they can, or they skin the sheep as much as they can and disappear. And so having someone that's deeply involved with the history of the Territory, but also wants to be deeply involved in the future, on a personal level, just gives is something you just don't always get, and it's comforting in a lot of ways.
He was the first Territory
the other
leader.
Thing about Michael,
first Territory leader to be born and raised in the Territory as well.
Yeah, I think that's actually 100% true. And if it's not, I'm just going to run with it. No, I think you're 100% right there, Michael. In fact, I probably had to write that down a few times. He definitely is. The other thing about Michael is he's very considered, and this probably leads into the other question I didn't answer probably quite properly. But Michael's leadership style was always going to be measured and considered. We obviously had a few inquiries into the last term of government. So one was the Pepper inquiry into onshore hydraulic fracturing, and that was a difficult policy decision. And I know probably not everyone listening to this podcast is going to agree with it, but they went to the people with a moratorium to have this inquiry. The inquiry was done. We had absolute experts into it. He actually listens to expert advice when it comes to making big decisions like that, and then operating off that expert advice. So there's a lot of leaders around the place that will shoot from the hip and tell you they know everything in the world, and that's really easy to look good doing that, but it's not necessarily always you don't end up in a good policy place afterwards. Whereas Michael is a policy purist in a lot of ways, and how do we make good decisions, and how do we keep making good decisions going forward, and we listen to the right advice. What COVID did was COVID slowed the world down. So rather than people grazing on the news and flashing it past either on social media, or maybe catching something on the radio or the telly for 10 seconds and it's a grab and it's a soundbite, people got to sit there and slow down and watch. This is how people are making decisions and the values basis they're doing behind those decisions. And I think what Michael did really well with his communication early on in the crisis was communicated the values that he had behind him when he was talking about the decisions that he was making, so that it might help people understand what he was trying to protect, how he was trying to protect it, and why he would have to make some of the decisions that he made. Whereas some other leaders across the place, probably even nationally, I think the federal government, I'm not going to be too hyperly critical of their handling of COVID either, because I think at the end of the day, we were probably one of the best countries in the world, even though, we're still going through a bit of pain in some places now. We didn't, as a whole, we did a fairly decent job, especially when that first wave was coming through. And what Michael was able to do was just explain and show why he was doing those things. And I think people responded that. They responded to his authenticity. They responded to his considered nature. But they also responded to the fact that he took the action necessary when it was necessary to take it, rather than sort of be frozen in the headlights by this, invisible threat coming towards us all. And the other thing you need to understand about the Northern Territory, there was a really big concern with what was going to happen in rural and regional and remote areas. So we've got 30% of the territory is obviously Indigenous, and we all know that those guys have a significant gap in terms of lifelong health stats. And a lot of underlying health conditions out there, a lot of problems where people were vulnerable, and if we hadn't acted early and COVID had got out into some of those communities, we would have seen we would have had some really, really serious and deeply sad headlines coming out of the territory very quickly. So we had to act fast, and we had to protect lives. That was the number one thing we had to do. And thankfully, we didn't get any community spread, and definitely no spread in those areas. And the job over, whether it's Labor continuing or any government over the next couple of months is, however long it's going to take, is going to be making sure that those remote communities stay protected.
How has the community, broadly speaking, across the territory responded to the way that the government has handled coronavirus?
Just the general sort of talk around people. I think most people are proud of the way that our government in particular has handled this crisis, and how Territorians as a whole have handled the crisis. I think we've all done what we needed to do when we've needed to. So there was no, whether it's from industry or from just people on the ground, people understood the threat that this posed. Obviously there were some industries that were hurting really early on. Hospitality and tourism was shut overnight, and they understood it. And I think one of the other things people need to understand about the territory, which is a bit different, you probably have a mental form of it, but don't quite understand. But we operate in a very sort of backwards weather nature to all you guys down south. We operate in a dry season and a wet season. The dry season is our high tourist season, so which is your winter. So we were basically, which is obviously one of our larger economic performing times. Not sure that's a correct sentence, but it's a good economic time for us. We've got V8s and races and armies of what we call. Yeah, you've got the cups. You've been there. Armies of grey nomads coming up in camper vans, and people going out to Kakadu, and they're seeing all the weird and wonderful things of the Northern Territory, and that was just turned off overnight. So what you have is a lot of business and operators that had just come through a pretty lean wet season, looking to do a bit of cost recovery and put some capital in the bank over a dry season, then it's just sort of taken away. So we have a situation where we had a lot of people in a lot of pain straight away. So the second part of the response was not just the health response, but it was the economic response, and the government went out really, really early, really, really fast with grants to adapt. So how could they adapt their business, and how could we help people adapt their businesses to survive? So, for instance, there's a really good burger joint on Nucky Street that I've probably taken you to once, Stephen. That it's a high quality gourmet burgers, and they had a license, and now you can get a takeaway burger and a takeaway beer to go with it. So there's just all that sort of things that we just sort of how do we best stay ahead of the game, and how do we change? Obviously, we were able to open our pubs and clubs and things like that a bit faster, which I think has a twofold effect. One is you're getting businesses open, people back to work, but on the second thing, it really reinforces that community aspect and that sort of social part of our life. So, I don't mind having a beer and a palmy at a pub occasionally, and it's just it's a really stark reminder that how lucky some of those things are that you just sort of take for granted as normal in your life. We've got to be open because we did the right things at the right time.
There was a great moment. I think I saw Michael Gunner doing a stand-up press conference where he was imploring everyone to just hold off. Look, I know you want to have a beer. I know that like it was just this genuine honesty that I just thought he was speaking fluent Territorian. That I don't think any other leader in the country could, get away with. I mean, Daniel Andrews stood on the whole, I know you want to get on the beers, which became a bit of a meme in itself, but just the way that Gunner was sort of just reaching out to people saying, look, I get the hardship that you are going through right now. I get it.
Yeah,
But you just got to work with me on this one for a moment, folks. Just hold on, all right?
yeah, and I think that authenticity and by opening yourself up and bearing your soul, probably at one of the first couple of conferences he spoke about how he was going to have a baby in April, and he'd had a minor heart attack in, I think, either late January or early February, and just I think the gravity and framework that gives you, as in what you're looking after and what you're protecting here. And he was really open and honest about how that had affected him and what he was worried about when COVID was coming, because people with heart conditions like Michael and myself, or any other serious underlying condition, this insidious disease was coming for us all, and that openness and authenticity, I think a lot of people found themselves able to easily identify with the struggles and internal turmoil that he was going through as a human being, not just as a leader. And I think that's what modern politics is missing a lot of times is we often try and put up such sanitised versions of different things that we forget how to be real people. And at the end of the day, politics is about people. It's about connections. It's about leading people, not just managing them and managing things. And I think that's something we do a whole lot better when we do it right on the progressive side of politics, because we're not just solving the problem in a textbook. We're making sure that people can actually get on with their lives and do the things and be able to feed their family and keep them safe. And at the end of the day, that's why we do what we do.
If there was ever a time in which public narrative has such an important role in in leadership and in communication to a constituency, it is now. Like the story of self, the story of us, the story of now. The story of self, best articulated by Michael Gunner when he talked about the impact that it had for him, and the concern that the challenge that faced him was a heart condition, a health challenge. The story of us that everyone else across the territory would also, and you even said it yourself, like it resonated with me because I too have. I've got some health issues that I was worried about. And then the story of now a present, real urgent challenge that is before us that we physically cannot see, but we certainly can. We are certainly aware of it. And we know what that challenge looks like because we've seen what has happened to people in the United States, to people in Britain, to people in Italy and Spain and parts of Europe. And then therefore, what is the ask that we put on our community right now? And the ask is, we all need to work together here. And we all need to do things like stay indoors or wash our hands and wear masks and all the stuff that it just, as an organizer, it just makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
There's a question coming here, and that is, but that can all be completely stuffed up when the media don't want to report it that way. And I find it interesting in Victoria that I think journalists are getting very frustrated right now because there is no filter between Daniel Andrews and the constituency, because he's doing press conferences every day. I think he's done like 42 in a row now. And he's talking directly to the community. And it's annoying the media because they can't spin it the way they want to spin it. I just want to get a sense from you about the NT News, which everyone knows about the NT News for all its incredibly funny headlines, but it is actually a legitimately serious paper for the people living in the Northern Territory. How have they behaved covering the Gunner response to COVID?
Yeah. Is this going to air before the election? Are they going to hear this before I?
This will be going up live. So, it's going up later tonight. So, by all means, feel free to temper your remarks, Kent Rowe.
No, I think not just the NT News up here. We've obviously got a lot of journalists buzzing around, but I think it's. I think it would be fair to say that when the initial response was happening, the NT News was, and the media up here was definitely on board with this is a big threat and what do we do to stop and deal about it. But I think there was a lot of times where people would want to move on and try and do their own agendas. So there was quite a heavy push around June, July to open our borders a lot faster than Michael was prepared to do, and the government was prepared to do, and the CHO was prepared to do. There was a significant push from lots of different sectors, and it's definitely those from the media as well. And that, in fact, that crescendoed with the opposition leader Leah Finocchiaro coming out in June, thinking she had the wind in her sails, saying that if she was chief minister, she would open the borders by June 22 or July 22, June 22, I think it was, and it was just a really sort of reactionary comment that was born out of the fact that there was a campaign being, there was a movement happening editorially from a few different newsrooms. It'd be fair to say that the sentiment from that push wasn't backed up by anyone in the community. And I did see a poll the other day for Dan Andrews after watching getting smashed on every platform I've seen for, whether it be a news site or Twitter or everyone should get off Twitter, by the way. It's really bad for your mental health. But whether it's one of those things, Dan Andrews was just off Attila the Hun as one of the most hated people in the history of the planet. But as soon as a poll was done, 140,000 people, jump on, and I think it was 60 or 70% said that he was doing a good job or they'd handled it the right way. And it just shows you that you don't, you have to do what you think is right all the time. You can't do what the most pressure is being put on you for, because at the end of the day, doing the right thing always holds up, but responding to media pressure doesn't necessarily always hold up. So, it's a real point of difference up here where, Michael said he'd close the borders and protect lives and protect jobs and keep you safe, and the CLP leader was out saying we'd open borders because there was a bit of a run on. So I think it's really important that you always hold the line and do what you think's right and keep working hard and doing those things. And I think Dan from afar has been working really hard with a really complicated place to do the best they can. And it's my comrades in Victoria. I know that all my friends that I've spoken to over the last little while, they just talk about how this stage of lockdown's a lot harder than the first, and it's the little things they're missing out. So any of my friends listening that I've spoken to on the while, although I will post the occasional photo of a beer, I do actually worry about you. And after the election, you'll get some mental health calls, I promise. But it's a really, really powerful thing for leaders to be able to communicate directly with their constituents, because that filter, as we know, just the way that politics is trending across the world, and the way the media is needing to trend just to stay relevant. They're looking for conflict, they're looking for things, or they're driving their own agendas. And being able to have a direct conversation with people is the number one thing, and that's why. Whether it's the media or, you're talking at a press conference or using your social media or you're on someone's doorstep, having that direct conversation with somebody and not having someone else's opinion put through the middle of it is what we need to do to survive. Because at the end of the day, progressive politics is built off complex thought and complex policy and a structured way to why we do what we do from a values base. We can't just come up with a one-liner and shoot from the hip and win all the time. I mean, we can do that sometimes, but we're not the party of one-liners, and we're not the movement of one-liners. So it's about having that right values base, and it's about having those longer conversations with people and being able to explain the why, or as you more eloquently put it, Stephen, the story of self, the story of us, and the story now. That's got to be the basis of how you're having your conversations. Whether you're creating a TV ad or a TV campaign, whether you're giving a 40-minute speech, a 13-second stump, 3-minute stump speech, or you're out in the door. It's like there's just, you need to be able to have that time to explain yourself and make people understand how you make a decision. Because if people understand how you make a decision, they're going to trust that you're going to make the right ones continually.
In 2014, you yourself, when you were the party secretary, and also Michael Gunner, I don't even think he was opposition leader then at that point, came down to Victoria to witness the organising efforts that that we were undertaking here in Victoria and sort of with the Community Action Network. 2 years later, the Labor campaign in the Territory lay the foundations, I think you often refer to it as Rio, of field organising as a part of your broader campaign strategy, obviously, mobilising volunteers and supporters to go and knock on doors, make calls across the Territory. In fact, one of my highlights was when, I think it was on the Thursday night before Election Day. No, not that highlight. I do have that in my notes, and I was wondering if I was going to talk about it. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. The Thursday night before Election Day, we had a phone bank, and Gunnar was going to come down at the end and sort of thank everyone and just say a few words and have a couple of beers and some party pies and stuff. The phone bank was so goddamn busy, everyone couldn't fit into the phone bank, but because the weather's so lovely in August in the Territory, that everyone was sort of sitting out on the grass out the front of the campaign office on their laptops, on their mobiles, making calls as the sun goes down. I was just like, going, this is, you can't write this into a bloody TV script. This is fantastic. And the energy and the enthusiasm amongst those volunteers that night was just, if you could bottle it, you would take over the world. In 2020, how's the field operation looking as we're a week out from Election Day?
Yeah, well, we'll start from the start here. I did get a chance to come down and see the field operations that you guys had set up in Victoria in 2014, and I thought we worked hard. I thought we worked really hard. I thought we did door knocking. I thought we did that stuff, and I walked into, and I just want to tell people about the powerful experience that I found there, and it's the one that stuck with me, and it was the one that lit the fire for my passion for community action networks and this grassroots organising, the way that it's done, and also the eternal flame that I hold for you, Stephen. But I was shuffled off into a phone bank in Paran. I'm saying that right, Paran?
Yep.
Paran, yep. And I walked in, and nobody in that place knew that I was a branch secretary from somewhere else. They just thought I was just some handsome guy rocking up to their office. And so I, walked in, and I was, everyone was really lovely and polite and happy, and I got to meet a couple of people, and I met the organiser, but the organiser was busy. So one of the other, like the lead, I can't remember what you call them now, but like the phone bank leaders or one of those guys took me to the side and sat me down and just asked me a few questions about me, and it just really made me feel like I was the most welcome person in the world. I said to him, "So how long have you been in the party?" He goes, "Oh, I'm not in the party." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Well, how long have you been involved with this sort of stuff?" He's like, "Oh, March. This is October or September or something." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. That's amazing." And then he sort of talked about everybody else, and everyone else had a really similar story. And for me, politics in the Northern Territory for a long time had been about 30 or 40 really hard-working people that worked really hard on every seat at every election, and that was, we were maxed out and burnt out and all that sort of other stuff. I'd go through 3 pairs of shoes in an election cycle by letterboxing and all that stuff. And I walk into this place where, there was people that had never been involved in the party or the movement before that were, giving up their Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, and they were making calls to people that, that we didn't know we were going to vote for the party, and it was just the same sort of feeling you had with that last phone with us. I was like, I need to get some of this electricity and put it in the bottle, lightning, put it in the bottle. Like, this is absolutely incredible. The nature of the place where everyone was supportive and looking after each other. And what that was able to do was help alleviate everyone's individual social anxieties, before you jump on and make a call. Like, I hate phone calls and door knocking. I get so much anxiety before I do it. I build myself up. But it wasn't just that. It was the machinery-like nature of the support that goes behind making that even one phone call. It's the training of the lead phone banker to help other people train. I got run through conversations before I was allowed to jump on the phones just to make sure it had a little bit out of the way. It was the resource scripts that help give you pivot points and help you find your own values and talk through those scripts. It was the fact that I got to see how those people were trained and the next people level were trained, and we often and I've campaigned all around the country in different things, and what I'll say about that my what I like to call the Victorian experience, which is completely different to everywhere else. It was the almost manic preparation methods that went into just being able to make sure the right things were being said to the right people, and not necessarily in an aggressive way, but the accountability that was built into that too, and making sure that people were doing the work they say they'll be doing, making sure that people understood the value of the work that they were doing. I think that's another thing we often forget, is that we get someone to say, come out in the door, do some door knocking or whatever, and they sort of scratch around. They might hold a folder. They don't actually talk to anybody. They leave. They sort of sit there, go, well, why was I even here? What did I actually do? Whereas, I walked into that place and they said, mate, tonight you're going to make 40 calls, and we think that every one of those calls that you make, that you're going to be able to help switch and change a voter. And if you change 5 voters for the night and everyone in this room changes 5 voters tonight, that's 50 voters, and we do that another 10 times, then we've changed 500 voters, and that could be the difference this election. And what sometimes gets lost as an individual volunteer, but I'm sure that the people listening are all in some form of volunteers, or they're going to come up the ladder in terms of the way that we do our business. You need to understand that these people, everyone wants to know why what they're doing is contributing to the movement in a significant way. And the big thing that you're helping people do for the first time is making them understand that Labor values and progressive values are actually values that are actually entwined in almost every Australian in some way, shape or form. You've just got to find the ones that do correlate and link up. Everyone wants to look after their family. Everyone wants to make sure the kids get a right education. Everyone wants to make sure that, they've got opportunities in life so they can better themselves and better people around them. And I think what COVID has taught us about us as a society is the fact that, we do really well when we look after each other and we all play by the rules and we invest in those things. And when we, and where we've struggled the most is in the sectors we've cut back the most. And it's a really empowering thing when you think about it. But sort of getting a bit drifting a little bit there, but getting back to what that has meant for the Northern Territory and the way that we campaign is we were pretty excited, and I just jumped off a tram, I think, and I rung Ryan Neve, who has also come down and done some things. He joined a pretty significant DVC effort in Minnesota in, I think, 2014 as well. I think the midterms up there, and so he was chomping at the bit from one direction. I was chomping in the other direction, and then we got Anna involved, and we talked to Anna about this direct voter contact program, and Anna was like, I don't know what that means. But she took to it like a duck to water. And Anna is one of those people that really proves the rule that a lot of people, come for the campaign, but they stay for the organiser. And Anna is just one of those people that you can build an entire system around, because she has the ability, the insight, and the just the right temperament to be able to make sure everyone's feeling happy and got what they need to do their jobs. But at the same time, I don't like putting a wrong foot around her, because I already kept it in line myself.
She's a true organiser, there's no doubt about that. How are you guys looking in 2020 in terms of the field effort? And then I want to ask you a couple of questions about your advertising strategy, and then we might wrap up with some predictions. But just the field effort in 2020, how's it looking?
Look, I've got the last 6 weeks numbers for us. I know the numbers are around 100,000 contacts over the last 12 months or something like that. So we want people elsewhere to know that 100,000 contacts is the entire electorate.
Yeah.
So like the entire electorate, like all of it. Yeah. So in the last 6 weeks, we've done 22,328 phones, and we've done 34,230 doors.
That's
so
huge.
We after coming back from Victoria and a few of us deciding that this direct voter contact program was the way to go, we really wanted to change the way that the basis of how we campaigned up here. And that meant breaking a lot of old bad habits. And some of that was easier to do and some of it was harder to do. And people that are trying to introduce these programs and push these through different branches of the party across the place, you're going to find these barriers no matter where you go. And all of this is just some people that have been doing certain things in a certain way for a long period of time and struggle to adjust. And partly because that's been a proven system to them and they know that how it isn't that the way it's always worked. And part of not understanding value of the new way you do something. But any young activist or even young activist that's listening, I think one thing you need to take away with yourself is if you're not getting any better at something, then you're probably getting worse. You know, the world is moving on around you. How are you evolving and how are you staying ahead of the game? And so for me, you know, the days of spending half your media budget on a print campaign in a newspaper or spending 3/4 of your budget on paid media in general, you know, those days that's the only way to get your message out had to be over. We went from in 2012 and 2008 and all the mid-20 elections, you know, running a campaign that was basically a direct mail campaign that was accented by lots of other things. And, you know, when you're paying 40 cents a letter, that was probably a bit easier to do. But now that you're paying $1.10 just to post something out in a regular post, if you're not getting UMS, you know, that's significant portions of your campaign budget that are chewed up by one or two mail-outs. And so, you know, we took the modern science and the modern data on what persuades votes, and we know that an unaddressed piece of mail shifts probably, I think it's 1 in 1,000 voters, and we know that a well-targeted door knocker will shift, you know, 27 out of 100, which is probably about 3 in 10. So if I can give someone a 2-hour shift somewhere and they can knock on 40 doors and get me 10 conversations, and that probably shifts me 3 votes. Whereas if I give them 2 hours worth of letterboxing, they'll probably get through about 500, so they'll shift 0.5 a vote. If I know where I want to be, you know, if I've only got 40 hours from that person over the lifetime of the campaign, I'd rather they go collect me, you know, 60 votes than 5 or 8 by then. Sorry, my maths isn't my strong point. But so it was a real change of behaviour and getting people to understand that this is why we're doing it, this is why we're pointing in another direction now, and this is why this particular part is so important. And as I say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and we definitely saw some fruit come out of it the last election, and we're hoping that we're going to get some good results this time around as well. Because the one thing that no matter what has happened, whether it be COVID or pre-COVID or all around, we've got a bunch of really dedicated parliamentarians and candidates that know that looking after people and talking to people one-on-one is the best way to do it. So they have been absolutely doing it.
How have you overcome some of the logistical challenges in trying to communicate the campaign messages to electors that are in those remote areas that probably don't have access to more traditional media platforms? Yeah.
So remote areas are difficult to campaign in definitely what we class as a traditional sense, either urban or probably even what southern bush would look like. You still there's low take-up rates of commercial television. There's low take-up rates of landlines and things like that. Mobile phones. It's quite often most people have prepaid plans that sort of they'll just buy a new phone every time they want one, as opposed to having that number for 2 or 3 years. So there's challenges in having access to the right data to be able to communicate with people. But one thing we do know is, you might change your phone, but you never change your Facebook account and you never change those social accounts. So we've really made sure that we've, in part of our creative production at this election, is make sure that we've given our guys as much material and assets as we can to be able to talk to their people, to how do they tell their story, how do they tell their local story, how do they tell why they're relevant to those people out there now, and talking to people, in their geographical locations, not just, dear people, I am good, like how do we really make sure that those messages are hitting the right people in the right ways. And so, Facebook's definitely been a really great tool and opportunity for us to be able to communicate and talk to people, and simple things like, do you know that you're going to be voting in a couple of days? Do you know that the mobile poll will be coming through? Or, there's lots of things that we're doing to actually just get out and have those conversations where we can.
Turning to election night, any of our listeners out there that will be listening or watching to ABC TV or Sky, whoever is going to cover it outside of the territory, the election coverage itself, some of the seats that we want to take a look at to where government's won and lost, essentially. What are the seats that you're going to be keeping an eye on as the results come in?
Yeah, well, I'll actually be counting pre-poll as the results are coming in. But one of the big things about this election is we predict that 80% of voters are going to have voted before election day. So that's really significant. So no, it's not quite the question you asked. It's probably the answer you wanted. So that's going to be really significant for us. But in terms of seats to watch, Palmerston's an interesting area for us. So we've held 2 seats out there at 2 different elections. We are trying to hold 2 seats out there in this coming election. I think that we've got outstanding people doing work out there at the moment in Tony Seavers, Eva Lawler, and definitely in our candidates, Mark Turner and Tristan Sloan. They're doing absolutely fantastic work out there at the moment, and they are leaving no door unknocked, as we say. You couldn't ask for much more out of a group of people that are really putting themselves out there. And if people only take one thing away from all the work you do in elections, go, that person works hard for me. That's a really big win. Because you're not always going to agree on lots of stuff, but if people know that you genuinely actually going to be out there working hard and not just using this as a pit stop to be able to get in the gravy train at Parliament House, then and I think people will respond to that. So Palmerston, so the seats there are Drysdale, Blaine, and Blaine's also held by Chief Minister or former Chief Minister Terry Mills, and he's the head of Territory Alliance. Palmerston, Blaine, Brendan, Blaine, Drysdale, and Spillett are the 4 in that particular cluster that will be interesting to watch. Catherine is an interesting one to watch. So we picked up Catherine for the first time in 2016. Our member retired midterm, and now she wasn't going to be running for Parliament, Sandra Nelson, who will always go down as a Labor hero for winning Catherine for Labor for the first time. But she's stood down. Labor candidate Kate Gainley is only quite recent onto the hustings, which has been unfortunate. I think with a bit more time would have been really good for her. But in saying that, I think it's a genuine 3-horse race in Catherine between the CLP, TAP, and Kate. I think that Kate is going to give Catherine a real run for its money. So that'll be interesting to watch. What's going to be interesting to watch there especially is what happens with the TAP and CLP primary votes. So at this stage, we don't actually really know who's going to finish second and third in that race, and then what the preference distribution is going to be, and that's going to cause that'll be where it spills out. So we know that CLP and TAP have got a bit of bad blood between them in different places, but they've got good relationships in other places. So it's just about who is voting for Territory Alliance in that particular place. Are they disaffected Labor voters? Are they disaffected CLP voters? What is that? What is the vote that goes onto it? So I think that's going to be a really interesting one to watch, Catherine. As we move down the track, or maybe not down the track, maybe up to the northeast. In 2016, we lost the former seat of Nhulunbuy, and that has been replaced by the seat of Malka. And it's basically the same place. It just has a much better name. And Lynn Walker is recontesting that after losing it to Mark Ungler. it's going to be a really interesting battle out there in terms of whether Lynn was able to regain any of the support some of the communities that when it went Labor at the last election. So, and whether we can maximise turnout in some of the places where we probably didn't do good enough get out the vote job in 2016. So that'll be one to watch. Daly as well is shaping to be quite an interesting electorate who are, they're actually at the polls right now, so they're 5 days into voting. There's Regina McCarthy, who's the Territory Alliance candidate, has got some good connections through there. Anthony Venus, who's the recontesting Labor candidate, has been teaching and working out in Water, which is one of the larger Indigenous communities for a little while now. And CLP obviously held the seat, but have, with retiring CLP member Gary Higgins, we only lost that seat by about 130 votes last time. So it's not out of reach by any stretch. So again, that's going to be a genuine three-corner contest. So that'll be another one that's interesting to watch. Again, it's who falls second and third is going to determine where those preferences go. The other thing to think about preferences in the Northern Territory, and I might be slightly to blame for this in the reason it happened in the first place, but due to the escalation of voting booth antics with the appearance of moving screens and scissor lifts with signs and things like that, the Northern Territory government banned campaigning within 100 metres of polling booth. That was the CLP government, and that's sort of remained in place. So being able to hand someone a how to vote card as they walk through the door is something that's dramatically reduced. So, whether preference flows coming out of that banning hold up the same way as the party would like is probably going to dissipate as well. So what we're going to see is probably more of a truer voter preference of those preference flows. So you can't sort of just go, well, that's on the card, so they'll get that. It's actually going to be a bit different. Another interesting one to watch is going to be the seat of Braitling in Alice Springs. That was held by former Chief Minister Adam Giles prior to the last election. He didn't think things were going very well for himself on polling day last time, and packed up at about 2:30 in the afternoon from a polling booth. Whereas the Honourable Minister Dale Wakefield didn't pack up and became the Honourable Minister Dale Wakefield. I think she got up by 31 votes or something off the top of my head. So never give up and never give in, guys. And so, again, Alice Springs is a place where we haven't been able to communicate our values with the electorate as effectively as we wanted over a long period of time. And it's about finding how well we've been able to do that over the last couple of years. But Dale's an absolute superstar of a human being, and if anyone, and has been absolutely putting in the work. So we just hope that she gets the result that she deserves.
Dale's victory and Sandra Nelson's victory on election night was those, if I can use some sort of sporting parlance, when your team's just winning so well and all of a sudden you're just kicking goals from...
No, I go for the Crows. I don't know about winning so well anymore.
I know that, but at some point where you're looking back on election night and go, can you believe that so and so did? That was kind of like Dale Wakefield got up, the dickhead went home at 2:30 in the afternoon, that kind of stuff. It was just the stuff of Labor dreams. And I really hope that Dale Wakefield gets back up again in a week's time. The other one I want you to just give us a bit of a rundown on is trying to regain the seat of Fong Lim after Jeff Collins has left the Labor Party, now running as Territory Alliance. How are we feeling about winning back that seat?
Look, the hero in this story is going to be a guy called Mark Monaghan, who's our candidate there. Mark put up his hand. Mark moved to the Territory about 20-odd years ago. Went to Tiwi, was a teacher and principal up there, then moved out Arnhem and was a teacher there, and he's come back in and stopped being a teacher, and he's involved in business, and he's just one of these people with a CV that's genuine, that is really, really good. And he not every candidate signs up to the program straight away, but we told Mark that if you're not door knocking, you're not doing anything worth doing pretty early on, and he has taken all that to a duck to water. So it's going to be difficult. There's some naturally highly conservative areas in that seat, just through marinas and things like that, and some pretty nice places. But there's also a lot of sort of old school Labor heartland suburban area in there too, and so it should be good. Jeff would be fair to say never really caught on to the direct voter contact program. So
that's been kind. That has been kind. I feel like it's okay. We can kind of not want to trash on anyone on the podcast, but I mean, like, yeah.
Look, Jeff. It's sad. I had a relationship with Jeff, and I like the guy, and he just he went the other way, unfortunately, and but there's but I wouldn't say that DVC was his strong point, and I'm not sure why it's going to start being it now.
Okay, well, fingers crossed we pick up that one as well.
Yeah.
Kent Rowe, predictions before we go. How you feeling?
Predictions. This is always a bit dangerous. Predictions. I think.
Well, but before you do that, while you gather your thoughts and say this is always a bit dangerous, let me tell you that I did, when I was over in the United States in 2016, a couple of months after the landslide election that you oversaw in the Northern Territory, I sat on the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York and did an interview with ABC Radio Australia with a journalist who was flown up from Washington, D.C. And she asked me that question towards the end. Prediction, Stephen, how do you think Hillary Clinton's going to go against Donald Trump? And I said, shit it in. Absolutely. Like, if Donald Trump gets elected, come on. Like, what are we doing? No chance. No chance whatsoever. So I'm on the record of being absolutely wrong. So it's okay. With that knowledge, Kent Rowe, predictions.
I'm going to preface this with for everyone listening at home that I am the absolute eternal optimist, by the way. So I absolutely eternal optimist. So we're going to win 35 seats. They're going to owe us 10 at the next election. That's how I'm going.
Very good. Nice.
Now, look, I think Labor's going to hold a majority. The size of that majority will be what's in debate. We would be ahead in a lot of key races that could have us quite high up the board. You never want to jinx these things, but there's 10 days to go. But there's a lot of votes in the bank already, and I'm confident that I'm part of the team that's going to be doing hard work right up to 6 p.m. on August the 22nd.
Excellent. Well, Kent, one, we appreciate your time to speak to us today, given that you actually are working on the campaign. So thank you for that. Two, we'll be watching...
Time off the door, Stephen.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's a bit hot right now. I get that. But I want you back out there in an hour, all right? Lovely dust door knocking in Northern Territory is beautiful. But we'll be watching on next Saturday night, not this Saturday night, next Saturday night, and hoping that you and Michael and the team can bring home another victory and continue to do good things for the people of the Northern Territory into the next 4 years. Best of luck.
Cheers, Stephen. Wonderful. Thanks for having me on.